Remember at the time they could have used the Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil, but they chose Guns N' Roses, Sympathy for the Devil.
Oh yeah, dude.
And you were like, man, that's not a good cover.
It was a
It
cover.
just happened like 10 minutes ago, so
Yeah.
that's why you remember it.
That was a cover that exists. That's my review of it.
It's not a good cover, but, you know, that's what happens when you're too cheap to shell out for some stones,
Yeah.
which apparently the production team for Interview with a Vampire was. Great segue of the year, they said.
Yeah, it was a good one.
So we just finished watching an Interview with a Vampire, a movie you haven't seen since like ever, man, right?
Yeah, it was a fetus.
You must have seen it in the 90s because that's when it came out. I guess. I don't know, man. I don't remember ever showing it to you on DVD.
It was on tape. Yeah, it was on tape.
So it's been a long damn time is what we're getting at. And it's been a while for me too. Easily over a decade. So it's time to, you know, review, rewatch the flick. Let's do this shit. So Interview with a Vampire, man. Look, it goes without saying that if you don't know, Interview with a Vampire is based on a novel by Anne Rice. And Anne Rice kind of, whether you like her or not, whether you like what she did to the vampire fandom, you can't deny her influence on that particular type of fiction. She pretty much finished the idea of the romanticized vampire, which honestly began the moment people began to see Dracula as an intriguing figure rather than one that incites fear. So as time and fiction itself progressed, the Hammer movie and stuff, it became more eroticized and he became more of a taboo villain rather than one to be feared. Anne Rice in the 70s wrote Interview with a Vampire, and she really put the nail on that coffin, pun intended. She really finished it off, polished it off. In the process, she kind of inadvertently fed, if not outright created, a subculture surrounding the aesthetics and the feelings of this romanticized version of kind of like almost gothy.
Yeah, it's what I affectionately called gay-ass vampires.
Yeah. You stress affectionately because you're all into that schlong. So yeah, man. Look, that's kind of her legacy. A legacy that ironically later she tried to shake off. But now she's re-embraced it because there's a whole thing with Anne Rice. You know, she's kind of a lapsed Catholic. She grew up in the Catholic Church, and I think Interview with a Vampire, the novel, and even this adaptation, which she adapted the screenplay, still holds a lot of that old Anne Rice. You know, that Anne Rice that, yes, she's writing something rebellious, something that's against the status quo that she grew up in, but it's more like she's wrestling with an idea because she wants to have her cake and eat it too. This entire movie is kind of themed around the idea of death, and the anti-hero in it is kind of like this de facto Luciferian figure, charming, charismatic, but, multifaceted and definitely manipulative. And there's a lot of elements there that kind of delineate her stance, at least at the time, on death and what that means to somebody that's being indoctrinated with what it means to go to death in a certain way. So this movie deals with those themes. But if you haven't seen Interview with the Vampire or not familiar with it, it's the story of Louis, a man that was seeking death because of circumstances in his life and was given undeath by the aforementioned charismatic and very manipulative man known as Lestat, which is not a man. No, he's a vampire, dude. He sucks on men a lot.
And it's very fitting that for someone who sucks quite hard, they picked Tom Cruise,
who sucks in real life. It actually kind of makes sense.
And on dudes.
Well, I don't know about that. They should have gone John Travolta then.
Oh my God!
Both sucks on dudes.
Ugliest Lestat of all time.
The casting of Tom Cruise was a big point of contention between the production and Anne Rice because she felt that the proper casting would have been Leonardo DiCaprio, which, by the way, at the time he hadn't even done Titanic yet. So it's not like she saw Titanic, swooned, and in a warehouse like Guardian did. That's a check to Guardian all the way wherever the hell he is.
Yeah, hell.
Nobody else knows what the fuck that means. But anyway, yeah, man. So it's not like she was swooning on the cap. although probably was because everybody was, and he is still somehow. It's that she thought he was the most fitting person for it, and honestly, per the book, he would have been the most fitting person for it. But I stand on the grounds that this is one of the movies that justifies why we put up with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
He is exceptional as Lestat. He blew the fucking roll out of water. He is so damn good that the guns that Anne Rice strapped to herself eventually were dropped when she saw the movie, and she's like, you know what? I have to kind of admit that he's pretty great.
The tot.
Yeah, I mean, he is
pretty good.
He is as his character is. He's someone that you go in kind of detesting as a person, but he charms you, and you kind of at the same time find him as revolting as Louis does, because Louis is a vampire that played by Brad Pitt, by the way, that doesn't want to accept his fate as a vampire. So the way Lestat shows his vigor for what he is kind of revolting, but he never ceases to be fascinating. I gotta give props to the man, dude.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Shockingly good.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably, that I can think of, the most tolerable Tom Cruise has been.
Which now, is, achievement, really.
The thing about Tom Cruise is that he's in a lot of movies that are cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of accept that he's Tom Cruise.
Yeah, you have to.
But in this, he kind of overcomes that. And you're just kind of like, he's pretty cool, man. Even though he's Tom Cruise. Yeah, man.
And you're right. This is like this. I put it up there with like Collateral and stuff like that, where he transcends his Cruise-ness.
Yeah, he's like, you don't even look at him as Cruise.
Yeah, he really becomes the character, and you're like, damn. Well, we got to put up with Cruise just in case he makes another one of these.
Yeah.
So yeah, I stand by that. But that also it speaks to the other cast in this, because if you have one good actor or an actor that does a particularly good job, and everybody else doesn't come up to that level, then you have a shitty movie. This cast, I think overall, comes up to that level. Or maybe that's the reason Tom Cruise is so good, because he had to come up to their level. I don't know. But they all complement each other very well. Brad Pitt kind of plays like what nowadays would just be like angst-ridden goth teenager. But, I hear that feeling of like the permanently mopey, dark type is given.
He's like Angel.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, in the perpetual state of brooding. But he's given so much substance because he's kind of like this moral ground in this world of immorality that he is introduced into by Lestat, who just fully accepts immorality. And Lestat ends up being kind of like an anti-hero, because you could see that it's not so much he's become what he's become, but he also craves something. He's hollow, he's empty. And I mentioned earlier that he's kind of like this Luciferian figure, and he is in a lot of ways. In fact, he refers to himself as such, and they refer to himself as such, to him as such. And but that's, I think, what reflects on Anne Rice's stance at the time. Again, as aforementioned, she was kind of like this lapsed Catholic, and that stuff never leaves you, And as time progressed, the Lestat stories, the Vampire Chronicles, changed tone, and he became much more the center of attention. In fact, he became the center of attention, period. And here he's a gray area. He's a compromise between good and evil, which I think someone like a lapsed religious person, and I can, attest to that. I think that's a gray area they struggle with. They struggle with the idea of finding a way to compromise their love for something that's not exactly seen as good by trying to make an excuse for it, especially if they're angry at something. And you can tell, I don't know if you could, but I certainly got that feeling that Anne Rice was angry at the idea of death in the world. And, Louis, I think, embodies that. Lestat embodies that. The vampires, decadent or not, embody some facet or point of view of how death is viewed. And, it's a point of contention for a lot of people, spiritually speaking. Like, why do we have to die? Death is horrible. Death is miserable. But she never gives your main character, Louis, like an acceptance, full-on acceptance of death. He's always struggling with it. and what that means and what fully. So Louis is kind of like that person that's struggling with spirituality, only in this weird cast of vampires.
Yeah, and it kind of ends with him still not knowing where he's at.
Yeah, an ambiguous place. Whereas Lestat, who ultimately becomes the star of her series of books, he just is he becomes the hero, you know, and that kind of reflects on Anne Rice. As time progressed, she just embraced these elements, and you know, ultimately when she returned to Catholicism, she stopped writing vampire novels. So that's what I mean by it really reflects on her personality. She would return to the character, and he's a lot lighter, and you could tell that again she's making compromises. But I think she never reached the level of genius that the novel Interview with a Vampire reached. Although I enjoy that series entirely. And this movie thankfully sticks very close to the material, while at the same time having a lot of stuff that borrows from the personality and style of its director, Neil Jordan, who had previously directed to much acclaim The Crying Game, which, you know...
The Ding film.
The Ding flick. If you haven't seen The Crying Game...
It just ruined it for you.
You're just about to get that spoiler. Yeah. It's a dude. Or I guess now it's not a dude. It identifies as a female.
Nah, it's a dude. There's a ding there. There's a dude.
Yeah, there's a definite ding in that woman's groin area.
I gotta say that was like one of the I remember seeing this as a kid. That's
Mm-hmm.
right. That's the movie you showed me as a kid.
Yeah.
Straight up dings, and I was like, damn, that's a ding.
Yeah.
And I was like, my mind was blown. Even though really when you look back at it, like, that's a dude.
Yeah, but you know what? That's just
played so well.
It attests to Neil Jordan's dedication to fomenting and creating great characters that you love, that you're attached to. So by the time, for example, in The Crying Game, when you get that twist, which you know, he's talented sometimes, but sometimes he sucks. Somebody like Shyamalan, for example, known for his twist, it would have been a gimmick twist. In The Crying Game,
like the whole time, it was a ding.
It's a gut-wrenching twist, but not in the way where, like, back then, especially in the 90s, people would be like, oh, gross, that's a ding. No, it's gut-wrenching because you know that these people have learned to like each other.
Yeah, and it changes...
And it changes the dynamic of their relationship. It throws a serious wrench in the fucking works. So Neil Jordan has a real way around characters. And here he kind of revisited roots that he had kind of started with a movie called In the Company of Wolves, if I remember correctly, except now with vampires. And so he took everything he learned in his past career, and especially with The Crying Game, and created something, and it really elaborated on what Anne Rice had done. I think this is one of the great adaptations. And I think the best key to an adaptation is when you can hear the strong voice of both what it's adapting, the source material, and that of the adapter, if you will. And this is one of those examples, man. It is a sprawling and epic film. It covers centuries, and it does so. But okay, it is pretty long. Does it feel long in the bad way or in a good way, in your opinion?
I don't know. I haven't read the book, obviously, because I'm illiterate. #truth. But it feels kind of like there's bits cut out, because it does kind of like leap ahead in time, and it feels like there's still like a couple things missing here and there. But it doesn't feel long. Like, it's not boring or anything. It kind of keeps you interested throughout.
Yeah, I think though it does obviously excise things here and there, it is relatively in line with the book. It communicates everything that needs to be communicated. Let me just say that. And they found a way to really give you the breadth and the scope of, in terms of the character and what it means to them, and where they're at, and how to tie it all with the themes. So they don't lose any of that, which is fascinating. And but yeah, I'm with you on that, man. This is never a slog. It's engaging to see these characters and their personalities as time progresses, you know, because they're technically unchangeable in this world. You know, they're a constant, and yet their struggle is the only thing that can change about them, or their lack of struggle in the cases of some. You did mention that some of the relationships in this, while we were watching it, not on screen, but you did mention that some of the relationships are, quote, pretty gay. And They are. There's a lot of homoerotic. You said undertones when we were talking about it before we shot the video.
Super overtones.
Yeah, it's overtones.
It's very fitting that the guy that directed The Crying Game did this.
Now it's interesting. Anne Rice's son is homosexual, so some people have attributed to that, or her trying to cope with that idea. This eroticized environment where there's never like this crossover between sex and the weird homoerotic tone. But her son, I think, was too young when she wrote this, or not born yet. I don't really remember.
It's odd because it's super freaking gay. Mm-hmm. But somehow, like they're never like sucking each other's dings or anything. Yeah. To put it bluntly.
In the books and as represented visually in this, the sexual equivalent, to us it would be boning, but to vampires the equivalent would be the exchange of blood, or rather them sucking each other literally,
basically,
on their necks. In case you're wondering.
Oh yeah, and there's like an extended like scene early on where freaking. Tom Cruise sucks on Brad Pitt's neck, and I'm sure many a woman creamed their pants back in the day.
Yeah, and you know what? It's good that you brought that up because some people in the horror community eschewed the meaning of this film, not to the degree that people did like a movie like Twilight, which, let's be honest, sucks. Yeah. But they kind of try to do that, like this is just fodder for horny chicks, but it's not, because although yes, a woman wrote this, and obviously there's something there in terms of a lot there in terms of the erotic nature of it.
It does definitely feel like something a woman wrote, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, it's never cheap, and if you read the novel, taken into light who Anne Rice was and is or whatever, you could see that, again, that weird internal struggle for her to compromise about something that mentally or spiritually she might have clashed with at the time. The result of that is vampires feel kind of gay. But it's weird because when you think gay, you think a stereotyped version of gay, and that usually means not very threatening. I don't think the vampires ever lose their menace or their weird kind of seedy and filthy nature. I think most present when our core characters meet the vampires in France and Paris. You get that weird,
those French.
Well, yeah, there's that. They're the French, so they just stink in general.
They reek, and it's not like corpse. But
it's Pitts, in case you were wondering, and I don't mean Brad.
Although apparently
Brad Pitt stinks like Pitts. Very appropriate.
Yes.
But yeah, I think the concept of the vampire here, although dramatically different from its roots, especially if you're going as far back as the mythological roots of it, it still manages to maintain a level of menace. I just think the menace changes from something monstrous and spiritually hateful towards something more ingrained with mortality, more ingrained with how temporal we are. That's the horror of it, and how that can be exploited, how death can be exploited or seen. That's where the horror in this lies, versus the more visceral, if you will. So it's an interesting change, and it's definitely not deserving of being cast away into that Twilight dump at all. So to those people that said that, I mean, I find it tragic that they would just cast it away because, Brad Pitt was a pretty boy at the time, and that's who they cast.
It does kind of feel like Twilight is like someone saw that chick or whoever wrote it, saw this and was like, oh, that's cool, let me write my own thing, except she sucked as a writer.
Yeah, pretty much.
You
pretty much described it.
There you go. Makes perfect sense.
It's look, yeah, like I said, it doesn't belong in that category, and it is very the moment you start watching this, it distinguishes itself right away. And so if you've never seen this because you thought that, not necessarily the Twilight thing, but that it could be something like that, then by all means go and see it, because it is an experience to behold. I gotta give special props to Kirsten Dunst. This was, if not, I don't think it was her debut, but it was definitely a very early role. She was a child in this, very young. I don't know. She was around 10 maybe at the time. She already was a pretty exceptional actress. She does a fucking fantastic job.
Yeah, I think she's probably the second best in this.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
She is really good, dude.
It's also very weird because, she gets she's like a little girl that gets turned into a vamp when she's a kid, right? So she's a kid her whole life basically, and like time jumps like 30 years from when it happened, and she manages to play a believable grown up as a kid, like even the way she moves and like talks and shit. And it's weird. It's super weird because she just looks like Kirsten Dunst now.
She looks like a small version. I mean, she is a small version of Kirsten Dunst, but her features have not changed very much.
She looks like her, and they have her in these like dresses that are like not kid dresses. Right. Like later on, obviously early on she does have that, and it's just odd to see like a mini Kirsten Dunst walking around acting.
And I think you really get because she has like. At first it's kind of like a petulant child as a vampire. But yes, like you say, she really exhibits a maturity as a character to the point where you really feel her plight.
Yeah.
Her plight ultimately as a character is that she can never be what she is inside.
Yeah.
Again, that goes back to that whole homoerotic undertone, only here it's almost, non-literal. It's very subtle, but she can never be outside what she is inside. So you really, really get a feeling for that and empathy for that because of the way she portrays it. It's so credible, like you say. It's so credible that you literally just go along with it. Yeah. She is an adult. She just happens to be a child at the same time. Physically, it's pretty unsettling in a way, and when tragedy falls upon her, you get like a double-edged sword because you still kind of see her as a child, but at the same time you've also empathized with her as an adult, so it hits you on two ends. So a very, very, very explosive role for her. I'm sure once people saw that, they were like, wow, this is going to be a star. And I'm glad she made it out of the mire that a lot of childhood stars don't make it out of. Because, yeah, man, I mean, we've only seen her do excellent work since then. And, Spider-Man with the titties.
That was some good titties, though.
Hey, look. Spider-Man titties was epic.
10 out of 10 Spider-Man titties.
Yeah, man. Very good set dressing, excellent prop work. This thing drags you across like 3 centuries, and it all comes off as credible. There's some incredible special effects as well. Now they're very subtle here, of course. As far as the vampires go, you just kind of get some pale, veiny guys.
Yeah, Lestat has a couple effects.
Yeah,
there is one effect that actually made me go, how did they do that? Because it's after Lestat gets double crossed, I guess, and he's like kind of melting a little, and they have him like fall. And he kind of like withers away, and it's shot in a way where it looks like it's like a puppet.
Right.
It also looks slightly digital. Like I could not tell what the effect was, but it looked really good.
If memory serves me right, it's actually a combination of both. Now Stan Winston, of course, is renowned for Stan Winston Studios were renowned for superior physical effects. So that's what they hired, and they made a real. Excellent, especially at the time, they set a real excellent bridge between the burgeoning digital effects era and the last legs of that physical effects era, and it works, man. some of the effects on this are still pretty impressive, especially when you take in when it was made. And even although scattered and few, the outright digital effects for the most part really work. Some, there's like a burning vampire at one point.
And even that looks kind of
it still looks stylistically neat. It doesn't look super fake like, some CGIs want to do. Excuse me. So I was very impressed by all that, man.
Yeah. What I liked about that effect in particular is that it did kind of look like a mix of two things. And it kind of reminded me of, like the Wolfman effects, where there were like these kind of like transitions that they would do.
Right.
It just kind of looked like that, like an interesting transition that they used on this.
Yeah, like a more character fluid version.
Yeah, and it did, like, for a second I was like, damn, how'd they do that? Because it looks like when he falls, it's him. You can tell it's him, and then he kind of withers, and it's not overdone, so it's not, you can't tell that it's like CG or it's very, very good effect.
Now, it is worthy to note that this movie, as the books, had follow-ups. The books are like on the 1 grillionth book now, and they are pretty interesting. If you're interested in learning more about the world created here, then it's definitely a worthy endeavor. However, even though this movie has a lot of fans, and I can't understand it, the movie... I'm not talking about this movie that has fans I can understand. I understand why there's fans of this movie because I'm one of them. It's great. However, this movie had technically a sequel. Neil Jordan, of course, did not return. And they got some other guy. And nobody else returned either. So they just got people. Remember Stuart Townsend? Nope. That's Lestat.
He's a guy?
He's a guy. Yeah. Stuart Townsend, coincidentally, was also going to be Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. And Peter Jackson was like, nope, let's recast.
And they got Viggo Morgenstern.
Yeah, dude. That's his real name, right? They were literally already shooting Lord of the Rings, and he was like, nope. So that guy is the guy that ended up taking the mantle of Lestat in the pseudo-sequel, I guess, to this. It was intended to be a sequel, but it feels so different and looks so different, and it's just overall different that, seen next to this, you're like, this sucks. Seen by its own, I suppose it could be an okay movie.
I like how you haven't even said the name of the movie.
It's called Queen of the Damned, okay? Yeah. And it sucks. Let's be honest. It has a lot of fans. I love the soundtrack on it. It's great. That's it. You know what I'm saying? The Queen of the Damned is really a mixture of the follow-up novel to this called The Vampire Lestat and the third novel in the series called The Queen of the Damned. And they kind of mishmashed those two into one story. And let me put it this way. Interview with a Vampire should have stood alone as its own book, and that's it. But because Lestat was such a popular character, they ended up making him the focal point of everything else. And as a result, the ideas in the Interview with a Vampire novel, and I guess by default the movie, were kind of retconned by Anne Rice. Louis was portrayed as an unreliable narrator, that he had lied and seen things through his perspective. Which, to be fair, that's how people do it, you know?
Yeah.
Your version of things is different than my version of things. You're the hero in your story, I'm the hero in my story, whatever, right?
I'm definitely not the hero.
You're just a fat guy in the corner.
Just a fat guy that smells.
Anyway, best story ever. Yeah. Man, the vampire less fat. Or more fat, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, man, that's the route the novels took, and it works very well in the novels because you're seeing it through the perspective of Lestat.
Yeah.
So he's telling the story, and you begin to question whether he's the reliable narrator or not. And being that he's an anti-hero, that question becomes deeper. In the movie that followed this, they just throw you into the mix of the weirdness that was those novels. And, in it, like, Lestat's a rock star, and he's got this little crazy tune that's going to wake up this Queen of the Dead. The concepts are so weird, and they're so just poorly translated onto the screen that they're really rather fucking silly, especially when you put it next to something like this, which is, in all honesty, in my eyes, a masterpiece. You're just like, this is a pathetic excuse for a movie.
Yeah, I remember I only saw it once back in the day.
One good, dude, right?
I don't remember anything except for like the shadow effects.
The vampires have a super speed. I think they did this very well here. I think that translated very well, except for that time that vampire just basically ran into a scythe.
It's pretty hilarious.
But in the Queen of the Damned, it's just like Johnny Cage effects.
Yeah,
bad ones.
Only worse, yeah.
Yeah, very bad ones. Overall, I would not recommend Queen of the Damned unless you're just going to watch it
alone
on its own merits. There's interesting things there because there's interesting things being used from the novels there. Like the whole history of vampires, which the novels further explore, is super interesting and cool. But the movie just stinky. You know what I'm saying? I guess if you liked Aaliyah, you might want to fucking see it. Right? Anyway, whatever. I wouldn't watch that. I would just stick with this. I will say that there is a series being ordered based on the Vampire Chronicles, so maybe we can actually see everything, coalesce as a whole now. But I think it would have been...
I'm surprised the CW hasn't ordered it already.
It might be the CW. Yeah. I don't
remember
who it was.
Sense.
I don't remember who it was, but hey man, anything's worth a shot. But I'm glad that we at least got the important novel in the series to have an excellent adaptation. So give me anything else you got, man. If not, we can move on. To them final little ratings and stuff.
I think this movie is very important for those guys that sculpt dead rats, because they got a lot of work with this one.
The dead rat industry was really in the money with this one.
All the budget went to those dead ass rats. Groundbreaking dead rat effects. Hey,
you know what? Not even joking.
No, they were pretty good.
It was pretty good rat effects.
I like the one where he wrings out the rat. No, it's a good movie. I enjoyed it. It's a long movie, but it doesn't feel long. Kirsten Dunst is really good in it, and it's also very weird because it's just like a mini her.
Dude, it's really weird.
Yeah.
At the time when I first saw this, of course, I think we're either the same age or practically the same age. So it was just a person that was like, oh, wow, she's a really good actress. And then as she grew up, you just kind of forget the old stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's the back of your head. But when you revisit, you're like, wow.
Especially with
mini Dunst.
Especially with her, because she looks exactly like her.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
I think, though I was kind of mocking... Though I was kind of mocking it while we were watching, I think the gay overtones are actually kind of an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah, really is. Wrinkle on the sack, if you will.
Though, at times, you're just like, man, these guys are just straight up homosexual. I mean, the dudes are like, I want you, and I need you, and I'm going to suck you off. But it does kind of add, like, an interesting wrinkle in the sack, like you said.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a sequel to Wrinkle in Time, Wrinkle in the Sack.
Better than the movie they made.
Oh, yeah. Hardcore. Anyways, good film. I'll give it like a 9.
Yeah, man. I love this movie. I was glad that, upon revisiting it, that I kind of actually like it more revisiting it, I've always had a real fond place for this in the old ticker. And, like you, I agree, man. We make a lot of fun about it and we joke and jest, but the weird kind of homoerotic undertones did in fact add a different kind of substance to it.
Yeah, and if you put yourself in the shoes of a gay man who is like struggling with his homosexuality, like myself,
clearly that was not an undertone.
No,
that was a spoiler.
That was me just telling you. It does kind of, like I said, it does add like an interesting wrinkle, like if you put yourself in that mindset. Yeah,
it really does, man. This movie can be read in a variety of ways. As aforementioned, that weird kind of spiritual struggle way. And yes, this homoerotic mega overtones, they add yet another cast to it. Excellent movie through and through. I really wish there was a world where this would have continued with Neil Jordan at the helm, or at least someone capable, where they just didn't rush out a sequel. I mean, they didn't really rush it out, but they were just like, we need a sequel, guys. Just hire whoever.
Can they act? Nope. It's all
Nope.
right.
But there isn't. But I'm very glad that the important novel in the piece got, and it's really, it's a standalone novel if you really wanted it to be. You never ever have to read anything else. So this, likewise, this is a standalone movie if you wanted it to be, and I guess you have to want it to be because that's the only good one.
Also, want to say that this movie has Christian Slater in it, and after watching Hollow Man 2, I swore off to Slate. I didn't want to punch him in this, so there you go. I'm not gonna praise him.
No, I mean it's Christian Slater, dude. You can't praise.
He's fine.
Yeah, I mean he's just kind of like the audience in.
Yeah.
So Slater.
The Slate.
That's my review of Slater. Yeah, man, I gotta give this movie a 9.5. I absolutely love it. I think it's a gorgeous, lavish affair, but it never overindulges in that.
Yeah.
It really actually keeps a tone that is credible and believable, if not somber at times and tragic. There's funny moments in this that feel really natural to these characters. It's not forced comedy. It's not that requisite summer movie comedy. It's just, it happens natural to the characters, to who they are, to their personalities. And, it's awesome. I love when that stuff happens. Highly recommend this movie if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it in a while, go check it out again, man. It's as great as it's ever been, if not better. Anyway, let us know what you think about the old Int with a Vam, as they call it nowadays. But as we call it, Interview with Vampire. Let us know what you think about it. Hit like, share, subscribe, and notification buttons, because we're out.